It was a busy morning at the airport, with travelers rushing to catch flights and announcements echoing over the loudspeakers. Among the crowd was a man carrying a yellow backpack, walking calmly toward his gate. He seemed focused, almost too calm, which caught the attention of a group of SWAT officers patrolling the terminal. They had been on high alert after receiving vague intelligence about a possible threat. To them, the man's presence, combined with his appearance, seemed suspicious. Their eyes locked on him, and within moments they moved in. Before anyone knew what was happening, the officers surrounded the man, shouting commands and drawing the attention of stunned onlookers. The man complied without resistance, laying face down on the cold, polished floor as they searched his backpack. People whispered and pointed, some recording the scene on their phones. The tension in the air was palpable, and many assumed the worst. This was the moment the SWAT team believed they had caught a dangerous suspect, someone who fit their profile of a terrorist. But as they opened the backpack, their confidence began to waver. Inside, there was no evidence of anything illegal, only a few personal items and a badge that made their blood run cold. It wasn't just any badge, it was an FBI badge. Confusion and disbelief rippled through the team as they began to realize the magnitude of their mistake. Who was this man, and why was an FBI agent being treated like a criminal? The situation was far from over, and what would happen next would leave everyone questioning their assumptions and decisions. The SWAT officers exchanged uneasy glances as they inspected the badge. It wasn't fake, and neither was the man's calm demeanor, which now seemed more unsettling than suspicious. He hadn't protested, yelled, or fought back during the arrest. Instead, he had simply followed their commands, waiting for them to come to their senses. One of the officers stepped away to verify the badge, and the tension in the air thickened. The crowd, still watching from a distance, murmured in confusion. What was going on? Was this man a threat or not? The man on the floor remained silent, his face unreadable. But behind his calm exterior, he was processing every detail: how quickly they had targeted him, the look in their eyes when they approached, and the fear they had projected onto him. He had seen this scenario play out before, but it never got easier. His position as an FBI agent had never shielded him from assumptions, and today was a stark reminder of that fact. Meanwhile, the officers were beginning to sweat. One of them, clearly uneasy, knelt down and asked, "Why didn't you say anything?" The man slowly turned his head and replied, "Would you have listened?" His tone wasn't angry, just measured and deliberate, but it hit like a thunderclap. The team was left speechless. They knew this wasn't a simple misunderstanding. They had jumped to conclusions, and now they were standing on a very thin line. As the badge was confirmed, whispers of the man's true identity started to spread among the officers. Their earlier confidence was replaced with visible unease. This was no ordinary civilian they had pinned to the ground, and the weight of their actions was beginning to sink in. But the full truth about who he was, and why he was there, was still a mystery. The air was thick with tension as the officers debated their next move. The confirmation of the badge had thrown them into disarray, but none of them seemed willing to admit they'd made a mistake. A senior officer stepped forward, his face tight with a mix of embarrassment and authority. "We had probable cause," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. But the truth was, no one could justify what had just happened. The man remained on the floor, his silence becoming heavier with every passing second. Around them, the onlookers had started to disperse, but a few stayed, their phones still aimed at the unfolding scene. One of the younger officers shifted uncomfortably, glancing between the man on the ground and the senior officer. "What if this goes public?" he whispered nervously. The question hung in the air like a threat, and everyone knew the answer. The optics of this arrest, a black man pinned down by a heavily armed SWAT team, only to reveal he was an FBI agent, would spark outrage if the video made its way online. The man finally spoke, breaking the uneasy silence. "You don't need to explain yourselves to me," he said, his voice calm but cutting. "Save it for my supervisor." The words sent a ripple of panic through the team. An FBI supervisor would not take kindly to this situation, and the consequences could be career-ending for some of them. But the real question, the one no one dared to ask aloud, was why he had been in the airport that day. What was in the backpack that had made them so sure he was a threat? In another part of the terminal, a woman in plain clothes watched the scene unfold from a distance. She seemed to recognize the man, her eyes narrowing as she took in the situation. Was she part of the same agency, or did she have her own reasons for keeping tabs on him? As the officers scrambled to regain control of the situation, it was becoming clear that there was more to this story than anyone had anticipated, and the truth was about to come crashing down on all of them. The officers exchanged glances, their confidence crumbling by the second. The man on the ground slowly began to sit up, brushing off their hands when they tried to help. His movements were deliberate, his calm demeanor only adding to the unease in the room. The SWAT team had gone from feeling like they were in control to being completely out of their depth. A low murmur spread among the officers as they debated what to do next. Some suggested quietly letting him go, hoping he wouldn't escalate the situation further. Others, unwilling to admit their mistake, pushed to detain him under the guise of procedures. But as the tension thickened, the man unzipped his jacket slightly, revealing more than just the badge. A second ID card was clipped inside, a high-level security clearance badge. One officer gasped audibly, realizing this man wasn't just any agent. The SWAT team's earlier bravado gave way to panic. They had crossed a line, and now it seemed they had tangled with someone who might hold more power than they could comprehend. "Stand down," the senior officer barked, but his voice lacked authority now. The mystery surrounding the man deepened as he reached for his backpack. Every officer instinctively tensed, hands hovering near their weapons, but the man's expression remained neutral. He unzipped the bag slowly, his actions deliberate. "If you're so curious," he said, his tone laced with irony, "why don't you see for yourselves?" The bag revealed a stack of files stamped with red, classified labels and a laptop bearing the FBI's emblem. The officers stared, dumbfounded. The realization began to set in. This wasn't just an agent on a routine assignment. This man was in the middle of something far bigger than any of them had imagined. Meanwhile, the woman observing from the distance moved closer, her focus unshaken. She pulled out her phone, quickly typing a message. Whoever was on the other end of that text was about to become a key player in this unfolding drama. As the officers struggled to salvage what little control they had, the pieces of a much larger puzzle were beginning to come together, and everyone in that terminal was about to be caught in its wake. The air in the terminal was thick with tension as the man calmly closed his backpack, his gaze locking onto each officer one by one. It was no longer fear in their eyes. It was the dawning realization that they had made a catastrophic mistake. But just as the senior officer was about to speak, a loud chime from the man's phone interrupted the silence. He glanced at the screen, his expression darkening. Without a word, he stood and shouldered his backpack, ignoring the SWAT team as if they were nothing more than an afterthought. Before he could take another step, the woman who had been watching from the distance approached. She was dressed casually, blending seamlessly into the crowd, but her sharp demeanor suggested she was no ordinary bystander. "Agent Brooks," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the murmurs of onlookers. The SWAT team froze, startled that she seemed to know who he was. Brooks turned to face her, his calm composure intact, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of recognition. "I didn't think they'd send you," he replied cryptically. The woman ignored his comment, pulling out her phone to show him something on the screen. Whatever it was, it made his jaw tighten. "We have bigger problems," she said quietly, but her tone carried an urgency that made the officers shift uneasily. She turned to the SWAT leader. "You've just interfered with a federal operation, and if you don't want this to escalate further, I suggest you cooperate." As the officers scrambled to process what was happening, an announcement blared over the intercom, calling for an immediate lockdown of the terminal. The woman's phone buzzed again, and she read the message with a grim expression. "It's not just here," she murmured to Brooks. "It's nationwide." Suddenly, it was clear. This wasn't just about a mistaken arrest. The SWAT team had stumbled into the middle of something far more dangerous, and the stakes had just been raised to an unimaginable level. The terminal was now in chaos. Security shutters began to descend, blocking everyone inside, and panicked travelers pressed against walls or crouched behind benches. Agent Brooks stood in the eye of the storm, his calm demeanor unshaken as he adjusted the strap of his backpack. The woman, now clearly his superior, moved swiftly toward the SWAT leader. "Listen closely," she said, her voice sharp but controlled. "You've jeopardized an undercover operation that's been in motion for months. The man you just tackled, he was our last chance to intercept a credible threat." The SWAT leader opened his mouth to protest, but was silenced by a single glare from her. She handed him a tablet, which displayed images of suspects and plans outlining an imminent attack. "You went after the wrong man," she continued, her tone icy. "But thanks to your interruption, we may still be able to stop this, if you cooperate." Meanwhile, Brooks was already moving. He walked briskly toward a restricted exit, ignoring the chaos around him, as if he knew exactly where to go. The SWAT team, now humbled and aware of their mistake, followed his lead. The woman kept pace beside him, speaking in low tones about the plan. "The real suspect is still here, blending into the crowd," she said. Brooks nodded, his eyes scanning the terminal with precision. As they approached a row of gates, Brooks suddenly stopped. He turned to the SWAT leader and, with a calm authority, ordered, "Seal off Gate 17. Now." Confused but compliant, the officers moved into action. Moments later, a man trying to board a flight was detained. Inside his carry-on was a device far more dangerous than anyone had feared. The room exhaled in relief, but just as the tension began to ease, Brooks spoke again. "Check his phone." The agent examining the device hesitated, then froze. "There's more," he whispered. This was just the decoy. Brooks turned to the woman, his face set with grim determination. "It's not over," he said. The real mastermind was still out there, and the clock was ticking. The phone led them to a startling revelation. A second suspect was already in motion, targeting a different location. Agent Brooks, now fully in charge, coordinated a swift response with the SWAT team and his FBI colleagues. The clock was ticking, but every step was precise. With the suspect's encrypted messages decoded just in time, they tracked the real mastermind to a vehicle parked outside the airport. Inside the car, they discovered a second, far more sophisticated device, prepped and ready to be deployed. Brooks personally led the negotiation to ensure the safe detonation of the device, leveraging his years of training and calm under pressure. The situation was diffused without casualties, and the mastermind was taken into custody. The airport, though shaken, was finally safe. The travelers who had witnessed the chaos began to understand the gravity of what had unfolded. Some even approached Brooks, apologizing for their earlier misjudgments and thanking him for his courage. He accepted their gratitude with a quiet nod, never one to seek the spotlight. As the scene cleared and order was restored, the SWAT leader approached Brooks, his expression a mixture of regret and respect. "I misjudged you," he admitted. Brooks looked him in the eye, his voice firm but forgiving. "Next time, remember, judgment without understanding is dangerous. We're all on the same side." The story ended with a sense of justice and reflection. The events of the day served as a powerful reminder of the dangers of assumptions and the importance of accountability. Agent Brooks returned to his mission, carrying himself with the quiet resolve of someone who had faced prejudice and turned it into strength. The true lesson: heroism isn't about appearances, it's about actions, courage, and standing tall in the face of adversity.